Hello everybody, I am Polygon, and in this video we're going to be talking about the 8 must-have brushes that every toolkit should include. The first one, of course, being the Move Brush, the most kind of simple and basic brush in ZBrush. Every toolkit should include some form of Move Brush, whether that's the actual Move Brush or something like the Snake Hook Brush, which is another great tool. The Snake Hook is great because you can use it at an extremely large draw size in a similar way to the Move Brush, but at smaller draw sizes you can use it to pull out your geometry. I typically tend to stick with the just standard Move Brush and use the Snake Brush in specific instances when I need kind of that little pull out or maybe a little bit of a stronger Move Brush. But something within the realm of Move. It is the most important thing of digitally sculpting, in my opinion. It's kind of like, for traditional sculptors, your hands, right? Your ability to control and move the form around. Pretty important. The second brush that every toolkit should include is something that will give you the ability to add and subtract form from your surface. I recommend either using the Clay Buildup or Clay Tubes brush. I think they're both really good for different reasons. I would experiment around with them and try to figure out which you prefer, but I'll show you the Clay Tubes brush here really quick, and you can also hold the Alt key to subtract and do the kind of alternative stroke with that brush. And then my custom brush, I'll show you guys down here really quick. This is my version of one of the clay brushes in ZBrush. It's just a little bit more smooth and clean, and at faster strokes, it doesn't get this kind of stair-stepping nature. It tends to get worse the faster you use the brush, and it's a little dependent on the resolution of your model as well, a little bit more so than this. But yes, some form of a brush that allows you to add and subtract geometry from your surface is extremely important, and that is why it is number 2 on this list. The third brush is going to be some form of a trim brush or planer brush. I like to use the Trim Dynamic brush personally. It's just a nice, quick, all-around good brush for a lot of different situations with trimming. But additionally, there are a few others that you could play around with, such as the H Polish, which is a little bit more destructive, a little bit more strong. And then the last one would be the Planer brush, which is the most destructive and strong brush on that list. So some kind of move brush, something that allows you to build up and take down form, and then something that allows you to plane out your geometry. The fourth brush on our list is going to be the pinch brush. The pinch brush is great for a lot of different things, really. I couldn't even name them all. There's a lot of specific instances when I use the pinch brush. But a couple just off the top of my head, it's great for using in conjunction with something like a trim brush to help you plane out different areas of geometry. It's also great for using on clothes for stuff like folds. Really, in general, it's just a great brush for controlling your form, and especially during those early stages where you're trying to work on planing stuff out and figuring out the most simplistic shape of something. The last brush in the kind of auto-include top 5 is going to be the Damien Standard brush, or at least some form of the Dam Standard brush. Let's go ahead and rotate around so we get an area where our geometry isn't quite so stretched like it was in the front. But the Damien Standard brush or Dam Standard brush is an awesome brush to play around with just for carving tight geometry into your surface as well as building it up if you need to. It's also great for using something like this with folds as well. The pinch brush and Dam Standard brush I think go hand in hand really well, and in particular if you go into your stroke menu under Lazy Mouse and toggle that on, there are a bunch of different other settings that you can play around with in there. If you want to pause the video and maybe copy mine, this is pretty much the standard setup that I use for most of my brushes. But that will give you the ability to make a little bit more of a clean stroke, and there are a lot of different things that you can do to play around with this. So Dam Standard and Pinch together are great, but there's one other brush that I'll mention that kind of bridge the gap between these two brushes, and that is a series of Mech Cut brushes. You can find these online for free, I believe. I can't remember right now off the top of my head where I found them, but they are essentially, it's essentially a brush that I guess if the Dam Standard and Pinch brush came together and had a baby, it would be this brush. And I'll just show you a quick little stroke with this so you can get an idea of how this brush works. So it's an awesome little tool. There are pretty specific instances where you would swap between the 3 of these, but that would be kind of the 5th placeholder spot there. Some kind of dam standard or brush that allows you to cut and carve into your surface. All right, we're getting pretty messy here on our sphere. He got a little wonky, got all carved up and stretched, so we'll try to be a little nice to him and maybe give him a quick Dynamesh here real fast. And that'll also get rid of our subdivision levels, which is important for the next brush I would like to show you guys. The next brush on our list is going to be the Insert MultiMesh Primitive Brush. The reason we're looking at this brush is because we use, or at least I do in my workflow, use primitives to begin creating pretty much everything directly here in ZBrush. There is this little button over here, append, that we can use to append stuff like a cube 3D, and that'll add that as a separate subtool. And that's nice, but it only appends it to the direct center of our scene, and if you continue to append a few more pieces here, you'll notice that they are all at the exact same size as well. So they're always at about 2 units cubed. So maybe you don't want it there in the middle of your scene, and maybe you don't want it at 2 units cubed. Well, a quick way to get around that is by using the Insert MultiMesh Primitive Brush. By default, I believe there should be a shelf that appears at the top of your screen. My custom UI doesn't allow for that though, so if you don't see that, press the M key on your keyboard and you should get that shelf to pop up. I'll just grab one of these at random. I'll grab the insert cube because that's what we inserted first. Or you know what, let's instead grab a sphere. So imagine that our poor little sphere here that we deformed and sculpted all over is the basic shape of a head. A great way to begin blocking out and inserting some eyeballs on your character, instead of appending a sphere, moving it, mirroring it, is to just turn on symmetry and draw out a sphere where your eye socket is modeled, and there you go, you got the beginnings of an eyeball. And we can even use some different options in our split menu down here, something like group split. Click on OK, and we'll split those off into 2 separate subtools. Just a few button presses, and we got our eyes kind of ready to go, and we can start modeling them up a little bit more from there. I will say though that for eyes, I probably wouldn't use this sphere specifically. I would probably use something that was a little bit more concentric in terms of topology. The next brush that we're going to look at goes hand in hand with inserting primitives and using low poly geometry. So this is just a cube primitive that I appended through the append menu under subtool. And we are going to be using the ZModeler brush to look at a few different functions here. So the next one is indeed that ZModeler brush, but before we play around with that, let's come down into the initialize palette and just click on quick cube. So we'll get a quick cube, and you can adjust the resolution of this if you want to get something a little bit different. Play around with some of these settings down here in the menu if you want to experiment with those. It's a great little tool. So with the ZModeler brush, I use this all the time. It's essentially our poly modeling tool in ZBrush. By holding the spacebar over a face, an edge, or a vertice, you get a context-sensitive menu with a bunch of different functions. By default, you'll have the QMesh function, which is similar to an extrusion, except it allows you the kind of cool functionality to extrude in and actually delete some geometry, which can be useful in some pretty specific instances. On edges, typically what I like to do is insert polyloops by inserting a polyloop around a polyloop. We'll do that over here so you can see what that looks like. It's essentially an edge loop. A few other functions that I use a lot are bevel, to bevel edges. So if I want to split an edge or just try to make a transition a little bit tighter so that when we smooth it later, it deforms less in that specific area. There's a lot of different ones there. I don't really use the vertex menu all that often, but probably the one that you will use the most in here is the split menu, which I can show you very quickly by hovering over the vertice, choosing split, and just clicking and dragging that out. But that is the ZModeler brush. If you guys are interested in learning more about this tool, I will link a video that should hopefully pop up at the top of the screen right now, if I remember to do it while editing. But yes, check that out. I think it's like 2 or 3 hours long of a live stream where I go through showing just about every single function that I use here in the ZModeler brush, as well as a few other hard surface modeling tools and techniques that you guys should check out. All right, the last brush on our list is some form of a curve brush. There are a great number of curve brushes that I think are really cool, but having some kind of really simplistic curve is extremely important for a lot of different things. I'll be using the Curve Tube Snap brush, which is a default brush in ZBrush, and just kind of dragging this out so you guys can see what's happening here, and I'll lower my draw size really quick. So I use this type of brush for stuff like trim. I use it on armor, clothing. I use it to block out folds. I use it to begin making hair. We can go back into our stroke menu under curve modifiers size, turn our curve fall off on and adjust our curve, and you'll see that we can begin creating maybe a strand of hair or a ponytail maybe. There's a bunch of different options that you can do with this. I even use this brush, or I actually use another one that I'll show you in just a moment here, to begin creating stuff like eyelids, eyelashes, eyebrows, all sorts of crazy stuff. Here's that other brush, the Cube Tube brush that I was just talking about. It is similar to the Curve Tube Snap, except it is a little bit more clean in the topology that you get, as well as it is a perfect cube. There are some other options that you can mess around with these brushes. I won't go through a full tutorial of how to use curve brushes and IMM brushes, but some really quick stuff. You can adjust your Z intensity to flatten out your IMM geometry, and you can use, again, some other options in here with stroke and size to get that to taper and fall off. And you don't even have to do some kind of fall off. You could do a smaller, larger, and smaller stroke. I mean, there's a lot of different options in here for experimenting and playing around with this geometry. But yeah, that's basically it. That's pretty much my entire tool set in terms of brushes that I use in ZBrush. Mainly, like I said, those first 4 or 5 brushes are kind of the big ones that I use more than anything else. And these other ones are just kind of tools that I think are really important, but maybe not necessarily auto-includes for every single workflow. Bunch of different brushes in ZBrush, and I know it's a little overwhelming, especially when you're starting out. So I thought this video would be helpful. Just a quick little overview of what I think are the 8 most important brushes in ZBrush. Hope you found it helpful, and if you guys want to check out my brushes, there should be a link down below somewhere to my Gumroad. You guys have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video.